got no problems of keep stopping and starting. It just means that you guys aren't sort of getting lost inside the console. I will keep asking and pausing to see if there are any questions. So please feel free to put them in the chat or just unmute your mics and have the one-to-one question with me. I've got no problems, okay? So a few slides and then we can jump into the console. So a little bit about the product itself. So KCM stands for Know Before Compliance Manager. GRC stands for Governance, Risk and Compliance Platform. The actual console itself is actually built up of 3.5 modules. The first one is compliance, the second is risk, the third is third-party vendor module, and then we've also got the policy management module as well. Okay, so everything that you're seeing today has actually been built in-house by our CISO, who came from PricewaterhouseCoopers. So we haven't actually acquired any technology or purchased anybody. We've actually built this from the ground upwards with the actual mindset of an existing auditor. The reason why he created this actual platform today was that historically when auditors were allowed to go onto a customer site before COVID, you'd still have to meet those compliance standard requirements. And people would come in with their self-assessment or their gap analysis and say, you know, we've met this requirement. Great, but where's the actual evidence to actually satisfy me as an auditor? And people come in with their spreadsheets and their file locations and their LeverArch files or their document systems and go, it is here, but I can't remember I saved it. I can't remember the file location. Someone's moved it, someone's deleted it. It used to cause him more problems to try and get the audit done. So he thought there must be an easier way of doing this, hence why he created the GRC platform today. So types of customers that I predominantly work with, like the 2s and 3s, you know, people using Excel spreadsheets and Outlook reminders and ticketing systems, which are fine, but the majority are using an Excel spreadsheet. That spreadsheet's going to start to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Starts to get very hard to manage and maintain. You chuck more resources at the problem. You tread on each other's toes. You start to duplicate things inside the organization, or things actually start to get missed off at the point of audit. KCM will streamline the entire process, okay? A little bit about the product itself. It's all housed in AWS, exactly the same as our security awareness training platform. Again, no hardware to purchase, no software to install. You also have the ability to upload into the console unlimited storage, all encrypted by 256. If you don't want to upload into the console, you can do it outside and use a document like a Google Drive, a Dropbox, or a SharePoint, etc. But the purpose of the console is to manage and automate your compliance audit cycles. You can start to track and map your policies. You've also got the ability to identify and respond to external and internal risks. And the last one, which is pretty big at the moment with the Kaseya attack, the SolarWinds and the Exchange, actually, what are you guys doing for your third-party due diligence? You know, are you actually doing any due diligence on the vendors and suppliers that you're currently working with? Are they still safe to do so? And I'll take you through that on the last module. So everything in the compliance module will start from a template, and you have 2 ways of doing this. You can either use our managed templates, which I'll share the list in a minute, or you've also got the ability to actually create and add your own custom templates as well. So the console's not locked down to any particular framework standard like a cyber. You can actually upload financial, educational, health and safety, key performance, internal audits, anything that you guys might be currently running from a spreadsheet. You have the ability to upload into the console yourself, or we can work with you and we can do it for you. The actual managed template list is this here, and this is an a la carte menu. So we don't charge you per template. You literally can have every single one of these framework templates sitting inside your console at no additional cost. So you might see some ones that you might recognize. You know, we have like the CIS standards. We have GDPR. You know, you guys probably all having to meet towards that. We have HIPAA. We have ISO, the golden standard. We have NIST in here as well. People like to align to that as well. We have PCI, everyone's taking credit card payment now. And then we've also got SOC 2. And then we've got the UK standards like Cyber Essentials, DPAs, FCAs, etc. Again, if there's something that you're aligning to that's not on this list, you can add it into the console yourself, or we can do it for you. What you might also recognize or notice that there's a couple of asterisks next to some of these frameworks. What that basically means is that we've actually sat down with the auditors and actually said, how do we make it a little easier for people to actually meet the requirements inside these frameworks? So we've actually put the guidance in there to help you write the controls to meet the requirements. Okay, makes it a little bit easier than having to have third-party consultants coming in to write business cases and plans, etc. We sort of help you along the way with that journey. Is there any questions at all on any of these framework templates? Does all of that make sense so far? No? Okay, so once you've got the templates, you're going to have to create the scopes. Basically, the scope is the actual name of the framework that you want to call it inside the console, but also where it holds all of the foundations of the requirements, the controls, and the evidence. So you can have multiple scopes from one framework template because you might want to have it broken down into different departments, or you might have, I had one recently that had a hotel chain. They were all working towards ISO, but they were doing things independently and differently and different mature levels. So to make it easier, they broke down the framework into a scope for each individual location. Once you've got your scopes in place, you're going to have a list of the requirements inside that framework. So if you guys are familiar with NIST or ISO, they currently call a control the same thing everyone else calls a requirement. So a control and a requirement would be, you must have a security awareness training policy in place. Our control is built up of these 4 elements. The first is the control guidance. So that will help you write the controls to meet that requirement. The second is the control documents. That's basically like your statement of compliance or the policies you have in place. The third is your test schedule. How often does that control or that control task need to be updated or tested? And then the fourth, who you've delegated it out to. Once you start to delegate the control tasks out to those individual users or departments, those people receiving those control tasks, need to put the evidence back in. Again, you've got 2 ways of doing this. You can either ask for it to be filed uploaded into the console, or if you want to stay outside of the console, you can use that doc link, like I mentioned, like a Google Drive, a Dropbox, or a SharePoint, etc. So at the point of audit, or if somebody was to ask you, well, how do you meet this requirement in that said framework, instead of searching through spreadsheets and file locations and asking people around the organization who looks after it, you can go straight into the console, search the control name, but then you'll have everything that you need to answer that question. But more importantly, you now have everything that you have on your fingertips on the mouse to actually satisfy the auditor at the point of audit. This last slide here will basically say that people get the notification that they're going to be audited. The majority of people start to worry, panic, and scramble because they leave it right to the last minute as usual. They get the audit done, they have the post-audit hangover, they get that compliance free fall thinking, you know, we've become audit zombies for the last 6 or 7 weeks trying to get everything in place, and then that audit fatigue starts to kick in. It has to be an easy way of doing these audits. This is where KCM comes in, takes that bell curve out, streamlines the entire process to the point where you could have multiple audits being done at the same time because you can give those auditors access to those individual scopes. So the ROI that you'll start to receive from the console, you'll start to see in the first quarter. Then you'll start to see it in that first 6 weeks, 6-month cycle. Then that 12-month cycle. Then years 2, 3, 4 onwards, you can basically start to kick back and monitor the dashboards to make sure you're above the curve and not below the curve because everything's already mapped and put on a frequency. The second ROI is actually how much physical time you can save not having to sit with that auditor, presenting the evidence for 5 or 6 days, not being able to go to management meetings and watching your emails pile up because you're sitting there having to painstakingly present the evidence to satisfy that auditor. You don't have to because you can give that auditor access to that scope. But a third one is that people are actually treating this like an insurance policy, because if these great people were the ones managing the controls and delegating the control tasks on Outlook reminders and task systems and they decide to leave, a lot of that information goes out the door with them. With KCM, everything's mapped, everything's controlled, everything's put on a frequency. So if that said person does leave, the console still starts to delegate things out. That new person comes in. They'll start to talk to the CSM, the Customer Success Manager, who will onboard them, support them, and train them, and they'll basically pick up where that person left off. Okay. Promise one more slide. Just to show you how we actually license the product itself, is actually 3 modules. The first is the silver. That will give you the compliance module. The second is gold. That will give you the compliance module and the risk management. And then platinum will give you the compliance, the risk, and the vendor. Okay, the only thing you lose is a module. Remember, with the life of the console, you have that CSM, the Customer Success Manager, that will onboard you, support you, and train you for the life of the console. Is there any questions at all from anybody before I actually go and spend most of the time back into the console now? Any questions on any of the slides, anything I showed you? No? Okay, thank you. So let's go into the actual console itself. And this is KCM. So the way we license the product is completely different to the way that we license our security awareness training platform, because that's per employee. This is per admin, okay? Everyone who gets a license gets their own dashboard, and we've tried to make it as easy as possible for people to actually manage the control tasks that are being delegated out by the people above. So we don't want you to live inside another piece of software. That's not the purpose of the console here. The purpose of the console is to come in, have a look at the control tasks that have been delegated that day, complete them, come out, and then carry on with your normal day-to-day jobs. Okay, we don't want you to live inside another piece of software. We've tried to make it as easy as possible, so I can see my task completion, what's active, what's due today, what's past due, what's waiting management approval, and what needs my approval if I have the authorization to do so. So you can use different people, different privileges inside the console. The color code system is pretty easy as well. So if I go back a month, so anything red is a control task that's been delegated to me, which is now sitting more than 7 days past due. Anything orange, or depending on how bright your screens are today, means it's sitting there less than 7 days past due. Out of the box, it defaults at 7 days, but you can change that in settings on the top right here. Anything green means it's been completed and satisfied. Anything blue, if we go back to this month here, means it's either due today, that week, and coming up around the corner. And anything that shows this aqua blue here, we've got to last month, means it's sitting with the approval managers or the internal auditors, just that final stamp of approval says, yep, we've checked Simon's evidence, it does meet and satisfy that requirement, we close it down, we'll be happy to present this to an auditor at the point of audit. Okay, so this is my dashboard here. When I normally ask people, when I do one-to-one demonstrations with them, I normally say to them, you know, you've mentioned that you're aligning to ISO 27001 or Cyber Essentials and PCI, etc. But if I was to ask you the way that you're currently working things, how quickly could you tell me how much of that framework has been completed so far, the control tasks that have been met and the ones that are still outstanding, but more importantly, what needs to be uploaded and tested this month? How quickly can you get that information back to me? And 9 times out of 10, it will take a while. A few minutes, maybe, no, maybe a couple of hours, maybe a day or so, open up support tickets. With inside KCM, you have a global dashboard. So all I need to do is actually, depending on the name of the scope that I've called it inside the console, if I want to look at my ISO, simply find my ISO scope. It will tell me my scope health, my gap coverage, my requirement breakdown, but more importantly, the control tasks that need to be met for that month, for that particular framework. So whatever I need to call my scopes, maybe my GDPR, same scenario, scope health, coverage breakdown, but more importantly, the control tasks that need to be met for that month, for that framework. You can start to move forwards and see what's going on in August. Maybe there's an audit coming up, and I can also start to drill backwards to see if anything was previously missed off. You also have a task library. So instead of going through those individual, seeing which ones have been missed off, you have an overview tasks. I go to status. Let's have a look at the ones that failed. It will pull through every single failed control task inside the console. It will bring through the approval managers, but more importantly, the user assigned to that control task and the control that hasn't been met yet, which is sitting failed. And there could be reasons why. You know, it could be on holiday, could be on long-term sick, or housekeeping's not great. Simon actually left a few months ago, but no one actually told them, and the control tasks are still being delegated to Simon, but they needed to go to Peter. What you'll do, everything that was assigned to Simon will now be transferred over to Peter, and then he'll start to receive those control task notifications. Is there any questions at all on the dashboards at all before I actually go into the compliance module? Any questions at all? No? Okay, so what you've also got in here is your metrics, okay? Every time you do something inside the actual console, it will start to build up a metrics report. You also have the visibility of actually running reports on users, what tasks are mentioned failed, and you've also got the ability to create exec reports. So instead of having to have management meetings to say, where are we with this particular framework and wasting time every quarter, I can actually create an exec report. I can actually send that out to the exec. It will say what that framework name is. This will have your customizable logos, and then they can see the gap coverage, the breakdown, what's been met, what's still outstanding, and a progress chart as well. So there's loads of ways of running reports inside the console, okay? So let's go into the compliance module. So everything starts out from a template, and remember, anything from that list I showed you previously will be sitting here. Anything that you want to create internally yourself, you can do so, and anything that you've asked us to create will also be sitting inside your templates library. From here, we're going to convert it into a scope, okay? The actual workflow I'll show you is actually very similar to pretty much anything that we have inside the console. It being a GDPR, a SOC 2, a cyber, a PCI, etc. So all you do, find the actual template that you're going to convert into a scope. And now this will be a list of all of the requirements inside that framework. Remember, we call them these requirements. ISO and NIST, these refer to these as a control. From there, I'm simply going to convert to a scope, and I can update this and I can actually call it what I want, amend it and change it. But the actual journey will start in the requirements tab. So what most people do is do a gap analysis or a self-assessment on that particular framework. It's normally on another spreadsheet, so we can get rid of probably 2 or 3 spreadsheets just from this workflow. All you'd need to do is basically answer the questions to the requirement. Have you met this? Have you not met this? This is partially met, and this may be not applicable to our organization. So it'll basically just mirror what you might have already in place. Yeah, we've met this. We've also met this. This one's partially met because we do have a control in place, but the actual requirement requires us to do this every 6 months. So it hasn't gone around on a frequency yet or a cycle. So we actually haven't met this yet. So it's partially met. This could be not met because we don't have a budget for a certain thing, or whatever the reasons for, you can put in here not met. Once you've done that, you'll start to see your progress on the bar here and also your percentages to build up the overall scope percent. So the workflow and scenarios I'm going to show you is that we can go through our self-assessment response and say today we're going to work on the ones that we've not met. From here, this will pull through all of the actual controls or the requirements as we know them that you haven't met inside this self-assessment. It will pull through. Now, I'm simply going to click on the requirement, and I've got the ability now to actually leave a note to say why we have not met this requirement. Okay, every time I come in here to try and work and meet this, and I leave a note, it will say who that person was, the notification they've left, and a date and a timestamp. This is pretty good for internal purposes and external purposes, because if you do run an audit and you've not met this, and unfortunately not here to do the audit, the auditor is going to go, well, why have you not met this? If there's no notes in here, you have no why, dear why. You're going to have to start to run around like a headless chicken trying to find out who looks after it, where is it done, how is it being met. In here is a great place to leave notes. From there, this is where we give you the guidance to help you write that control to meet this requirement here. But because there's no control in place and you haven't met it yet, there could be a potential risk to the organization. So from here, we can bleed this requirement straight into my risk register. It pulls through the risk name, the description. You can put the consequences to say, well, this is an accepted risk or a triggered risk. You can put your own categories in here, your subcategories. Then you can use the sliding scale from the likelihood to the impact, which will build up your inheritance risk score, which I'll show you more inside the risk module. But is there any questions on that workflow at all, where you can probably get rid of 3 to 4 spreadsheets on that workflow, from your self-assessment, your gap analysis, the list of the requirements inside the framework, not meeting that requirement, and then sending it to your risk register? Is there any questions at all? No? Okay, so second workflow is that you're probably going to be familiar that if you're aligning to multiple frameworks, you're going to start to reuse and recycle the same evidence and the same controls. So instead of trying to do a copy and paste from spreadsheet to spreadsheet, I can actually go to my controls library inside the actual requirement. I can search my controls I've started to create. Let's say this actually is going to be my access control. I can find it, simply click it, the box here on the left-hand side, save it. And now whoever is responsible for this control here, it doesn't make too much difference, but this control also automatically meets and satisfies this requirement. I don't need to do anything else with it. That can save me hours of time from control mapping. Does that make sense? What I've done there? Is there any questions? I can recycle the controls I already have inside the console, and I can start to map them and reuse them to other requirements inside the frameworks. Any questions so far? No? Okay. Last scenario is that we don't have a control in place. So let's unmap this. We're going to create the control, and then we're going to delegate it out to somebody. So what I need to do is unmap this. And now I'm going to keep the naming convention as tight as possible. And now I'm simply going to create the control. Put the control name in here. And in the control description is normally where you're going to put your statement of compliance, or your policies, or whatever you have in place in here, okay? So I can tag this and say, well, this control also is going to be aligned to maybe my CIS. It could also be a link to my ISO 27001 and link to 9001 as well, okay? I can start to tag these if I want to run a report. These can be like these tags, like the needle in a haystack. Once I've created the control, this is the control I have in place to meet this requirement, and now I'm going to delegate it out. So all I simply need to do is create the task schedule. Now I've got 3 options to create a task schedule. I can actually do this as a one-time task. I can delegate a control task out to somebody. They receive the notification, they complete the task, it closes down, it never resurfaces. I can use the effective date range to say this control task needs to be updated between now and the next cycle or December or financial year. Or I can actually put this on a frequency and say this control task needs to be updated or tested every week, every quarter, every month, every year, etc. I'm going to say every year. Then you've got the control owner. Who are you going to delegate the control to? This will be a list of the people using the console. And then I'm also going to put the approval manager on here. There can be like an internal auditor, quality manager, just to check the evidence on Simon. So let's put the approval manager. There's a second level in here as well. I could do this every year. The due date, let's push this out to, say, the end of August. The task name, the description. How do I want the evidence to be uploaded? Do you want to do a doc-link or a file upload? I'm going to say doc-link. Once you see that task schedule, an email notification will go to that user to say they've been given an annual task. Once they come in and complete it for the first time, on that second frequency, the console will delegate an email notification 6 months before that task is due, a month before, a week before, a day before, and every day afterwards until that task has finally been completed. So you don't get false positives. You don't have to keep chasing those people to say, where are you with the evidence? Because the console will automatically do it for you. Once you've created that task schedule once, it will carry on sending out those reminders until you change the frequency or for the life of the console. Is there any questions so far on creating a control and the actual task schedule?
Although we do have one in the chat box from Danny, who's asked, how would you incorporate risks in the risk register from external factors, not processes or controls?
I'll go through that in the actual risk module, because what I was just showing you earlier was that a lot of people have 3 or 4 different spreadsheets, and it's very hard to manage it on a spreadsheet. They have to go from, well, this is the requirement inside the framework. Okay, we haven't met this. So I actually want to put this as a risk to the company or the organization. So then I have to go to a separate spreadsheet, take all of that data from the requirement and then put it into my risk register and then put controls in place on how I'm going to mitigate it or if it's an accepted risk, etc. But I was just showing you how easy it is from taking one requirement, not meeting it, and sending it straight to the risk register is having to go through 3 or 4 different manual processes. I'll cover that question though in the actual risk module in a few minutes time, okay? If that's okay, Danny. So carrying on very quickly then. So now we've got the control task. Once we start to build the controls up, I can start to say, well, this is the frequency. This is every year. How often do we meet it? Who's actually assigned to? And also if there's an approval manager. So now we're going to complete the control task. So we can come in here. I can leave notes in here to say how we do this, but more importantly, the evidence requirement is not yet met. You've asked for a doc link. I'm going to create the link. If it said file upload, I've got access to my documents. Take the policy or the documentation and I can add it into the control. But we're going to do the actual link itself. So simply create the link, keep the name and convention the same. But this is where you're housing that piece of evidence. So I'm going to have to use Google on here because I don't have any actual drives. But this will be your SharePoint, your Google Drive, your Dropbox, etc. Okay. So once you start to put this in here, okay, now you can start to put your versions in here. It could be version 1.1a maybe, or version 2021, stroke 2022. And then the description can be, you know, your control diagrams, your step-by-step guides on how you meet and satisfy the requirement. Once you've created that, you can see now the supporting evidence is in here. I can hover over, I can check the link. This will take to Google, but this will take to your SharePoint or wherever you're holding that location. That looks fine. Now, I've got the ability to update my task. If you remember on the dashboard, it was showing blue. Now I've completed my task that's been requested of me. On my personal dashboard, it goes green. But if I go to the global dashboard now, it's awaiting the approval manager. So if I go into August, it's now sitting with the approval manager. An email will go to the approval manager to say there's some evidence that needs to be updated and checked and approved. They'll come in, look at the notes, look at the information, look at the links, looks fine, approve it and save it. But if the approval manager isn't happy with the evidence provided, the link is broken, they've uploaded the wrong documentation, or it just doesn't quite satisfy the requirement, I can actually say, well, this is insufficient. I can say why I'm kicking it back. There's no notification inside the console. That will go from satisfied to active, and that will go from waiting approval to open, and then the whole scenario will go back round again until the approval manager is happy with the evidence supplied. On this occasion, I approve it, I save it. That goes from satisfied and approved. This has been approved, is now closed. This is now satisfied. If I go back to the global dashboard, and this is where you'll start to see the ROI inside the console, because once you've done that cycle once, everything's set up, mapped out, frequencies put in place, you can just sit back and monitor the dashboards and see where you are on a bird's eye view inside the organization. I know it's a lot to take in so far, but is there any questions on that workflow or scenarios that I've just showed you completing inside the compliance module? And then we go into an audit. No?
We do have one more question in the chat box.
Sure.
I think it's from Gary.
Perfect.
It said the system issues emails every day after the time limit has been passed to allow the manager to fire and forget. Should there not be a system of informing a manager via email that the action has not been addressed after a time period?
There isn't an email as such, but you can just go into the global dashboard and you can start to monitor the red tasks if they are in place, or again, you've got your task library and you can start to monitor which control tasks actually haven't been met. So I can go to failed and I can see and run an actual report on that person with all of the actual failed tasks. So the emails will look similar to this. One second. Here. So they'd have your logos, your primary colors, the person you've delegated the control to, and you'll control what they need to do, and they can come in. Once it's gone over that said time, they'll receive an email like this every day until it's completed. But I don't believe that there will be an actual manager email until it will go to the approval stage. But you can monitor it easily inside the console and the dashboards. So answer to your question is no, an email won't go to that person, because I don't think that manager would want to have an email every day as well, clogging up their inbox, but they've got easy access to see inside the global dashboard on that particular framework and scope. I hope that answers your question, Gary. Is there any other questions? No? Okay, so just a few other things that rely and relate to the actual compliance module. You also have a documents library. So anything that you put inside the console, have access to all of your evidence, all of your policies that you've got in place when they're last updated, all of your vendor documents. These can be contracts, terms and conditions, and DPAs, and all of your control documents as well. You also have your controls library. So if you remember back that I showed you that you could map a control to a requirement, if you've got multiple frameworks that you're aligning to, this is how it's going to save you even more time. So if I go to my controls library, bring up my security awareness training, I can see what it's tagged to, but this is what I can do when I showed you on that slide. Someone asks you, how do we meet this requirement? Well, it's easy. Well, we do it every year. This is the frequency. Well, who looks after this control? I can see, well, this is the user assigned. This is the approval manager. Where's the evidence to support this? Okay, we'll go to the evidences tab. Where is it being located? It's on a doculink. It will take me to that SharePoint, Google Drive, Dropbox, etc. Okay, well, is there any documentation assigned to this? Go into the documents tab. Yep, there's one inside the console, or if there's a link to the actual certificate or the actual results on how and when you did your last security awareness training update. This is where it gets quite clever, that I can map a control to multiple requirements. So what happened is that all of the scopes you've created with the requirements that haven't been met yet will start to pull through. If I start to search keywords like the control name and start to type in security awareness, it pulls through anything that requires security awareness training. I'm also aligning to PCI, so I can map 12.6, 12.61, and 12.62. I'm also aligning to CIS. I'm doing best practice 17.3, and I'm also aligning to ISO 27001, A722. I've just met 5 requirements in 3 different standards in less than 10 seconds. This control mapping can save people hours and hours of trying to do this manually inside a spreadsheet. Is there any questions on that multiple control mapping at all before I move on? No? Okay. So you've also got policy management as well. This really should be called policy acknowledgement, but what you can do here is you can actually start to create campaigns and force those out to people. It doesn't go towards your license count. So what you could do is, say you've got like a company handbook and you've recently changed the policy from working from home because of COVID. So I can actually create that campaign, send that out to everybody. They'll get a notification email like I showed you. They click on the link, take them to the intranet or wherever that policy is being held. Their policy will open up inside a box. They'll read it. At the bottom of the actual policy, it will say, please tick this box to say that you've read and acknowledged and understood the policy. If you do not, go and speak to your line manager or VP, etc. But you'll be able to see all of the people that have acknowledged and all of the people that haven't. The people that haven't, you can start to nudge those users and start to send out emails. And if you don't accept the policy, sorry, then we're going to remove you from the network, etc. That's one side. The second side is that we've actually recently added policy templates. So instead of you having to write the policies to meet some of these requirements inside the frameworks, we've actually done it for you. And these are free of charge. And what they look like is something very similar to this, or this is them. Instead of having to sit down and write them, we've actually done it for you. You simply just put your logos in here, the policy owner, effective from the date, and you can edit, amend, add, and change anything you want to the policy. But they're already pre-written and done for you. Is there any questions inside the policy management? I won't spend too much time there before I show how an audit will happen. No? So let's say that you're going to have an audit. You might have like an internal 6 months audit internally. So I can go to my metrics, put up my summary report, look for the actual framework itself or the scope, and I can see my self-assessment, what we've met, but more importantly, I can go in and see the controls I have in place to meet that requirement. If I'm going to go for a full external audit, I can go to settings, I can create a new user, and this is a free license, remember, we don't charge you for these. Go to user role, this is an auditor, and I'm going to give the auditor access to that scope that they're there to audit me on. So this is my ISO, and maybe I'm going to allow them to see my onboarding campaign. They only get to see the audit that you've given them access to. They don't get to see anything on the left-hand side. So now we're going to go to the point of audit, bring up my detailed compliance report, see the one that they're there to audit me, and now I can stay inside the console. I don't ever have to leave the actual console itself. The feedback that we get from auditors is that because everything has to be done remotely at the moment still, their basically words are, it's a screen share of mess because you're having to bring through calendar reminders. Well, how often do you do this? How often do you update it? Where's the actual evidence? Putting out file locations, spreadsheets, task reminders, etc. I simply can run the audit through scope. I can show the auditor, these are the control tasks we have in place. We update this every quarter. But I can also drill down into the control task itself and show to the auditor, well, this is our statement of compliance, but more importantly, this is now the supporting evidence we have and how we meet that and satisfy the requirement. This is my policy we have in place. This will take to Google, but this will take to your SharePoint or your location and any other supporting evidence. I can now have this at the point of my end of my mouse button. If the auditor says, well, that's great, but that policy isn't correct, you need to change it, you've done it every 6 months, but it needs to be done every 12 months. Okay, fine. We can go into the control task itself. We can update the control and say the auditor has now referred us to change this from 6 months to 12 months. Fine. I can put the notes in here. I can go into the control. I can go and now I can update and change that policy from every 12 months to every 6 months, etc. I can now do everything on the fly with the auditor, and that's how you can get that audit done in half the time. Is there any questions at all in the compliance module before I go into the risk module? Any questions in the box?
No, not at the moment.
No? Okay, cool. So inside the risk module, we use a risk wizard. You don't have to use it, and we've taken NIST 800-30 as a common framework for risk management. So if I simply go into advanced, these are the categories that we have inside the actual wizard. If I want to look at the description, simply pull the arrow down. If I want to add it, I simply pull the green slider across. So once I start to go through the different categories, let's just grab this one for the demo. Keep going through. This is where I can start to search my master risk list. This is where I can import risks via CSV if they're currently on a spreadsheet, and then I can also create the risk as well. But I'm going to confirm what I've taken from the risk register this afternoon and confirm this. Once that's done, it will populate the actual risk register from the categories that I've currently been using, but then you can also see I've actually customized and added my own subcategories for my different frameworks, miscellaneous, vendor risk, etc. This is unlimited for you to add custom categories. Once you start to put the risks in place, you'll start to see a warning on how many you actually have. So if I click in here, I need to look for the last one I'd done, and I just want to bring one up. I do really need to tidy this demo account up. Bear me 1 second. There's a warning sign here. What you'll notice that there's no control in place, but the inheritance score is also mirrored the residual score. There's no control in place. So this is what you can do to update the control when you want to start to add them as well. So if I go to update, if you don't like the naming conventions inside the wizard, you can change this to the craft fishing names, the descriptions, you can add your own consequences. The categories, you can add your own subcategories. Say this is legal and compliance. Then the risk status, what type of risk is this? This is an accepted risk or a triggered risk. I'm going to put a mitigation because I'm going to put controls in place to mitigate against this risk here. And then I can also tag this. Tagging system again is a little bit like that needle in the haystack. I could say, well, this particular risk is going to be for probably all staff, anyone with an inbox. This could be a target for them. It could be for all locations as well. It could have a financial headache of, say, I don't know, 25,000 penalty, different departments, etc. From there, it automatically generates what NIST actually puts the inheritance risk score. This is a moving scale. So I can actually do my own risk and say, well, craft phishing attacks, the likelihood of the risk happening, I would say it's almost certain. But the actual impact to the actual organization, instead of it being major, it could actually be catastrophic, depending on how bad that craft phishing attack is to you guys. Once I've got that, that'll build up my inheritance risk score. Once I save this, what you'll see now is the inheritance risk score mirrors the residual. I now need to put controls in place with a treatment score to take that residual score down. And you have two ways of doing this. You can either use the controls you already have inside the compliance module. So a great way to actually mitigate against craft phishing attacks would be, surprise, surprise, security awareness training. Do I already have a control in place? I do. All I simply need to do is press the map button. And now I need to put the treatment score. The treatment score is unique to you guys. It could be a percentage. It could take it down by point systems. The CSMs will also sit down with you and work out the best way for you to do this. I'm just going to leave this as 5. Accept that. And now once I've done, I can see this is the control I have in place. The treatment score is 5. 5 for that inheritance risk score will take my residual score down to 164. So the treatment scores will start to add up. Take it away from the inheritance, we'll leave you the residual. You can also start to create your own controls. Once you've got the controls in place and everything starts to add up, you've got a dashboard here. So you can start to see very quickly where your top risks are inside the company, inside the organization. You can start to see where your top riskiest tags are, all staff related risks, financial headaches, different departments, different locations. You also have a 5x5 heat map. You want to try and get this as far to the left-hand side as possible. And then you've also got your risk category overview as well. If you want more reporting, you've got the custom reporting. You can take that data off of the console via CSV format. And if you want to plug it into a Power BI or any other reporting software, you've got the ability to take this data out of the console and do as you wish with it. And that's basically the risk module before I go into the vendor module. Is there any questions at all related to the risk module? No? Okay. So let's go to vendor. So this is technically like a free license. We don't charge you for the amount of vendors and suppliers that you add into the console and start to do those due diligence questionnaires on. So everything starts out in a questionnaire. And you can have like tier 1 questionnaire types, tier 2, hardware, software. You can put tenders in here, financial agreements, whatever you want to put in here. Again, you have the freedom to do so. So once we start to build out the questionnaires, excuse me, sorry. We give you 3 options. If you've already got questions that you're currently using internally, you can add those into the console via CSV. We also give you access to our templates. So we use SIGLite, SIGFUL, and CIQ. There's 1,500 questions in SIGFUL. We broke it down into categories. And then what we've also done is actually broke it down into subcategories. So let's just go into Cloud API. There's 10 here, 8 in Cloud Security Configuration. These are the 8, and these are the questions that I currently want to use. So I can start to build up my own questionnaire. The way they answer them from the questionnaire templates is yes, no, not applicable. But what we also give you the ability to do is add your own custom questions. So they might be the first 5 or 10 custom questions that you want to get out of the way. And the first one could be, are you ISO 27001 compliant? If yes, please can you also attach supporting documentation or evidence or certificates, etc. And I can also pick how I want that question answered. This can be a free-form text, so they've got the ability to actually type out their own answer. You can have like War and Peace in here. You can also have multiple choice style questions, and up to 10 of these are the answers. You've also got the ability to use a checkbox with weighted scores, and you've also got the yes, no, not applicable style questions as well. But what you can also do is add your own internal risk score system. They don't get to hear this or see this, sorry, but you can start to put your own hidden risk score. So once those questionnaires come back, instead of you having to manually sit there and go, well, that was a 5 is a yes, and a no is a 1, and not applicable is a 2 maybe, the console automatically does it for you. Once you've got your questionnaires in place, you need to start to add the vendors. Is there any questions on creating the questionnaires at all? No? Okay, so now you need to add the vendors. Adding the vendors is very easy. If you've got lots, you can import them via CSV. If you want to create a new vendor, contact name, details, the organization, the industry, the details of service or goods they're supplying you, if they're holding types of data, and also you can use their qualifying questions if you wanted to. Once you start to create the vendors, what will happen is they have their own portal, very similar to this, nothing on the left-hand side. They will start to get those notifications like I showed you earlier. You've been sent a due diligence questionnaire. Click on the link, takes them into their console. They will get access to the questionnaires. So now I can see a bird's eye view of my vendors, types of data, scores, etc., who's pending approval. Now we can actually drill down into one. So I can start to see my vendor score is 85.5. The original score is 75.5. I've offset this by 10%. The reason I've done this is just to show you for the purpose of the demonstration is that I've worked with this vendor and supplier for many years, but they didn't answer very well in a couple of the financial questions because they've been hit quite heavily with COVID. But I still want to work with them. So I've offset this by an additional 10%. And I've also said why I've done so. I can do it reverse way and say, well, the ISO 27001 style question is you said you are ISO. I've looked at the certificate that you've attached. Great. But it looks like it expires in a couple of months' time. I don't know if you're going to certify again this time of year. So you could be a potential risk. So I can downgrade them as well, but I can also put notes in here to say why. I can also take a number of different questionnaires and actually put them on a schedule. Again, get rid of my Outlook reminders. I don't have to worry because once I do it once, it does it for the life of the console. I can put the frequency to say this goes out every year, and I want it back within 12 days after receiving the notification. I want to be notified if it's not in here already. I can also see the assigned questionnaires. I can start to see which ones have been reviewed and exported off, which ones have actually started, but actually haven't come back yet. So I can actually say, I can nudge the vendor and it sends out another email notification. If that doesn't work, I can send an email with a link to the questionnaire. Dear sir or madam, we're doing our due diligence. We really need to get this back. If that still doesn't work, I can pull that questionnaire out of their portal. They no longer get access to it. This is a real nice feature that we've added. So normally when people go through their spreadsheets and they've got the answers back and they don't like the way they've answered it or they've missed something out, they have to send out the whole questionnaire back. What we do inside KCM is actually open up an issue with that one question. So what I can do, come in here. But what I can also do now is I can start to speak to the vendor inside the console and keep it nice and clean. And I've also got now evidence of my conversation. I don't have to look at my last sent items, my last reply items. It's all in here. The actual priority was critical, and now I'm speaking to the vendor. I've taken it down to minor. The maximum score on this question was 5, but I don't like the way they've actually currently answered it. I'm going to downgrade them to 1. I do like the way they answered it. They can maintain that maximum score of 5. Okay. Any of the actual attachments that you're asking for, PDFs, terms and conditions, DPAs, will still be browsed in here and also in your documents library on the left-hand side. And any of the contacts that you're working with, remember, this is a free license to do so. IT, HR, InfoSec, finance can create their own questionnaires and start to send them out to those vendors and suppliers that they're working with. Once that's all in place, I'll give you another dashboard, and you can start to see very quickly who your high-risk scoring vendors are, who your low-risk scoring vendors are, your vendor status, who's active, who's pending approval, how many issues you still have with each individual vendor. Questionnaires have been sent back incompleted, so I can resend those out. And then I can start to put these on a schedule, and I can start to monitor them. So once I put them on a frequency and say I want it back within 7 days or 12 days, if it comes back in that said time, it will show green. It's inside the console ready for you to review. If it goes red, unfortunately, it's not come back in that time. You need to start to nudge them or start to chase them. And anything that shows blue means you've had it back, you reviewed it, exported it out. It's now sitting back on a frequency. It'll go back on the next frequency. And that's basically the vendor module. Is there any questions on the vendor module at all?
I do have a couple of questions in the chat box, actually.
Perfect.
From Danny, we've got, is there a limit to the number of questions in the questionnaire?
No, unlimited.
Excellent. And we've also got, can you calculate an overall risk rating based on outcomes of risk questionnaire? Does the system generate a report of this?
It doesn't generate a report, but what you'll see if you go back into the actual vendor itself, once you start to put those questionnaires in place and you put that hidden rated risk score in the back end, it automatically calculated up. It won't generate a report, but you'll start to see it here. Plus, you'll also start to see it in the dashboard as well. High risk scoring and low risk scoring, but it won't generate a report, just a dashboard. You could put it into the risk register and actually have an actual category for risks, for vendors, like I've put in here. Go in here, create my own subcategory for my vendors, and I could actually create a risk for each vendor and put it in that way if I wanted to. But there's no actual way of running reports inside the vendor module from the actual risk score. Any others?
Yes, I've got one which is a bit more broad-based, but I'll ask it now anyway. It says, are there any use cases that highlight how this compliant management platform has improved processes and diverted potential regulator investigation? So I guess cases of its use in practice.
Yeah, we have white papers, and I can send them to you guys, and you can forward them out to the people that attended. There's case studies, there's exec reports. The actual main point of is that the whole purpose of the console is to actually make your lives easier and actually get the actual audits done in half the time, because everything's centrally located. It's inside the console. You don't have to bring different departments in to say, okay, well, this you're looking after this part. Now I need to bring you in, and then can you present the evidence to the auditor? I don't have to do that now because everything's inside the control. The feedback that we get from the auditors is that they love this product because it's so easy to use. The feedback that we have is that they wish everybody would have a console like this because it makes their life a lot easier, to the point where some of the auditors are actually recommending that they've actually seen this now and actually recommending it to existing customers that they're going and actually doing the audits on, which is music to my ears because they're actually coming to me. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your questions, but the purpose of the tool is actually how much time it can save you. There is something I can quickly show you very quickly. Here, 1 second. I think it's this one here. So this is actual a case study, but what they actually said was that how much time this can save you, and time is money. This is without KCM, with 5 people involved, with the amount of emails you sending, creating, and requesting back. And then this is without with KCM. If you start to actually work that out per requirement, per framework, per template, you start to actually work that out, this can start to save you thousands of pounds worth of money, of wasted hours, people doing this, because they're having to spend all that time gathering the evidence for the fact before the actual audit's done, and then actually chasing people to get the actual audit back. You can see this on a time, and I'm happy to share this information with you. I can put a little pack together, and it can be sent out to everybody that attended. I hope that answers your question. Any other questions at all?
No, not at the moment. Right, in the chat box at the moment.
No. So just before we come out of the console, there are some customizable settings in here as well. You obviously can take the KCM logo out and put your own logos in here. When you start to delegate the control task emails, you can put those in here with your primary colors. You've also got the ability to add MFA. We also have single sign-on as well. We also have the ability to do this as well. There's a drop down box of some of the ones that we already have in place as well. And that's basically KCM. I can show you how it's licensed and priced if you wanted to, or you know, the way we module the license the modules is the silver, gold, and the platinum. But that's basically KCM in a nutshell, if there's no other questions.
No, I don't think we've got any in the chat box unless anyone wants to raise a hand and ask one personally.
Yeah, or turn the mic on. We might have tried to get you a couple of minutes back. We had it till 4 o'clock, but managed to whiz through it as quickly as possible for you guys. I do appreciate your time, so thank you for joining. But if there's no other questions.
No, I can't see any. None on there.
Okay. Okay, no problem then. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and we'll send around, if you can send me that the sheet, we can send that around to attendees, a case study and some further information. And
yeah, definitely.
People want a one-to-one demonstration as well. That's something we're more than happy to arrange too.
Sure, definitely. Yeah, you know, some people don't want to ask the questions. I'll be more than happy to do a deeper dive into the console one-to-one, no problem at all.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending. Obviously, we'll share some further information with you, and if you have any questions or anything in the meantime, please do get in touch, and we'll try and help. But thank you for your time today.